Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a sunny Monday afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about get on the right track with tracking in 2025 with Awin and Top Cashback. Just to explain who I am, I'm Julia Stent. I'm a strategy advisor and board member to affiliate and SaaS companies. And I'm also part of the advisory board for the Affiliate and Partner Marketing Association, the APMA. I support companies with their revenue strategy and how they respond to industry developments. So this is particularly timely for me because I'm coming out of a series of board meetings and team training on exactly the topics that we're talking about today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what our speakers have got to talk about today. So let's introduce them. We have Adam Ross, CEO of Awin. Adam, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, everybody. And thanks to Julia for doing this. Very much looking forward to it.
And James Little, Group Commercial Director from Top Cashback.
Hello, thanks for coming along.
So today we're going to be talking about affiliate tracking and consent. And we're going to be talking about why having the right setup is so important, both for advertisers and for publishers. And it's a particularly important date today because today marks the eagerly awaited launch of Awin's Conversion Protection Initiative, or CPI. Some of you might have been there at PI Live last October when that got announced. I think there's been a lot of excitement, a lot of discussion about that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some updates on that today from Adam and James in terms of the publisher response to what that's going to mean. So why don't we kick off? Why don't we start by zooming out a little bit and getting a bit of a sort of overall picture of where we stand? So James, I'm going to put this first question to you. Can you give us a bit of the current state of play of where we are with tracking? What's going on at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I'll be assisted with a slide that will just give you an idea of kind of what we're seeing. So effectively, when we look at our data from a Top Cashback perspective, from back to probably 2019 through to kind of where we're up 6 years later, I think like the most important thing that we see here, the most worrying thing that we see here is that overall our conversion rate in that period has dropped by 22%. And like there could be a lot of things that are kind of making up for this. Like we obviously have gone through COVID, we've gone through the kind of Ukrainian war, we're going through all the tariffs at the moment, and who knows what that's going to do when that starts to kick in as well. So completely understand that like ultimately like it's not just tracking that is going to be causing that downfall. But when we go on to the next slide, what you'll also see is you'll see that our claims or TQs or whatever OMs or whatever it might be that you call them, wherever you are, have gone up in a similar way. So that, like, if you look at the trend line on those two graphs, they're almost the exact polar opposite of each other. So that suggests that actually tracking is the major thing that's having an input here. So that's kind of why we end up kind of setting up a team internally to say, right, okay, what can we do in order to kind of tackle this? Like, what are the problems that it's facing? Yeah, I think affiliate marketing often gets caught up in privacy wars between browsers and Meta and big tech and all that kind of stuff that actually like no one that is doing all this probably cares about affiliate marketers tracking their sales, right? And that will only continue. So I think that's why it's really important to kind of, and we've been championing this topic for kind of a couple of years now. And you would have seen a lot of the stuff that we've done around consent and why we've kind of targeted that as kind of the biggest thing that we can kind of look at first. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're up to. We think there's a lot of sales that's going missing. So yeah, we've calculated based upon kind of our numbers and our conversion rates, what they are today versus kind of what they are and where we kind of sit in the market. We think that the UK affiliate industry alone has probably lost about £60 million in Q1 this year, compared to kind of what we would have done if the conversion rates had stayed the same.
So that's pretty shocking. I'm sure there'll be lots of people on this call quietly maybe doing their own sums about what that might look like. But Adam, from your perspective, is this just Top Cashbacks that's seeing this? What are you seeing across the network as a whole?
We're seeing a very similar picture. And that was really why, what inspired us to launch CPI back in October. At the time, I mean, this is a funny thing, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. But publishers like Top Cashback do quite sophisticated analysis on it. There are other publishers in the market that have other ways of detecting this, particularly publishers that have credit cards linked to their services. So we had a picture of how bad this was. I think at the time in October, I said it was somewhere between 10 and 50% of sales not tracking, through poor tracking setups, through the lack of app tracking, and to some degree because of consent. So this is a really significant problem, and we really felt that we had to draw a line in the sand and do something about that, which was really, what got us to where we are today.
Excellent. And we'll come back to that shortly and talk in more detail around Awin's launch today. But let's start first of all. I guess we talked there quite broadly about tracking. I think one of the most current topics within that is around consent. How about what's happening with consent, James? What are you seeing on your side?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is we've done quite a lot of analysis. We also use Moonpool as a partner to kind of so we can understand what advertisers we work with have their tracking either before or after consent. And again, if we can bring up the slides for 1 second, I'll be able to show you a graph that kind of shows just on the next one from here what the conversion rate difference looks like off the back of that. So I think this is like one of the most impactful graphs I've seen in recent times, right? So what this effectively shows is the blue line is merchants that and their overall average conversion rate, where they have their consent, as they have their tracking working regardless of consent or not. And the orange line is to say those merchants and their conversion rates, where their tracking is behind consent. And you can see that that gap is getting wider and wider. And I think a big part of that is because consumers are probably more likely to say no now to consent to what they used to be. Now maybe they understand about their privacy a bit more, and there's more and more stories over, how Big Brother's kind of tracking around the internet, etc. I think there's also potentially the point that like there was lots of work the ICO themselves have been doing. So when you look at some of the letters they sent out across like the end of last year and even the year before, where they went to both publishers and advertisers and said, your consent box isn't appropriate and it needs to be updated. It needs to have kind of an acceptable / rejectable button and various other bits and pieces like that. I think sending those letters out, that's what got the BBC to update theirs. Amazon updated theirs. Whether it's compliant is another question. There's some big brands who have updated it and maybe either change a box or maybe even move where kind of affiliate tracking is as well. So, and I think for me, like the worrying thing is I can only see this gap increasing. I don't think it's going to decrease. Now, there's obviously work that we've done on it from a loyalty perspective, where we've kind of got confirmation that consent isn't needed for cashback customers. But there's also the wider industry point over like, well, what else do we do to ensure that, that ultimately that affiliate marketing is getting a fair representation of the sales that it's generating. So I think it's important to kind of continue those conversations, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think advertisers should think about consent in relation to their affiliate partners?
So I think there's two strains to it. I think like number one is looking at cashback partners or loyalty partners. So we effectively identified out of our top 2,000 advertisers, all of those where we know their tracking is behind consent. As we started that process, I think there was just over 500 advertisers. So about a quarter of advertisers who currently have their tracking behind consent. We've been in touch with all those advertisers and explained it from our point of view. Like now the ICO have clarified that cashback and loyalty traffic does not require consent and can be deemed strictly necessary as long as a cookie isn't being used for other purposes. Then we've contacted them all and said, look, we need you to update your tracking, need you to introduce Awin consent signals, for example, and we need to get that piece of work done before, and we've set a couple of deadlines. So the latest deadline is the 1st of May, in which we're hoping to have the majority of those advertisers sorted out. And when we have done that, we've seen some amazing results. We've seen on kind of ICO compliant boxes, that conversion rate has probably gone up by as much as 20% off the back of it, which actually ties in nicely to what we were seeing earlier on when we talked about the numbers that have gone down. So there's definitely improvement when that happens. And that isn't just the case of us tracking more sales, because we obviously don't keep the commission of it. It goes back to the customer. So you've got happier customers because they're not just our customers, they're shared customers. And you have customers who are more likely to purchase a game with that brand because no one wants to have to put through a claim in a TQ because it's a pain, not just for the customer in terms of putting it through, but also the advertiser in terms of having to sort them all out. I think from the second point of view, so outside of kind of cashback and loyalty, I would suggest that the kind of thing that publishers should be doing is looking at like what's happened to their EPCs over time, speaking to advertisers to understand, what is the impact of the consent boxes here? So, for example, can they share what percentage of customers say yes or no to consent for where their cookie sits? And how can they be compensated for that, either in terms of a high commission rate or a higher cost per click if they're on a cost per click, or some kind of hybrid model? And maybe that's also something that networks will start to look at in terms of how that compensation can be paid to publishers to make sure that they are getting a fair amount for the sales that they're generating as well, in a similar way to what CPI has. So I would love to see more of that happen in the industry. But those are two strains in which advertisers kind of need to look at the moment, I would say.
I think James brought up something really important there, that there are ways to do this in a compliant way that have a significantly positive effect on tracking and the outcomes of your marketing activity, right? Most advertisers we speak to, they want to be able to measure accurately, and things like this get in the way of that. So what we want to do is create much more openness and transparency around the setups that are going to work the most effectively, and they're going to provide compliance whilst also giving more accuracy. And I think, for that to happen, we need to have an open conversation about it. We need to be talking about consent signals. That's Awin's solution, to track that and allow for exemption for loyalty and cashback, and start to look at accept and decline rates across different setups and across different advertisers, and see if there's something that we can come up with to find a fair way to compensate for an issue that, as James has clearly demonstrated, is becoming bigger and will continue to grow. So, and I think one very important point to make is that even it doesn't matter how sophisticated the technology gets in terms of our ability to track journeys, you still require consent. So even the push that we're on at the moment to improve tracking accuracy, it helps a great deal, but it doesn't solve the challenge of consent. And I think that's an important message for everybody to understand.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the things that we say. So we've emailed out all of these advertisers and said, look, you need to make a change to tracking, integrate consent signals, for example. And I think Alia, who's our tracking manager, who kind of sends all those emails out, gets quite a lot back that will say, oh, we're integrating server to server, so that's all great. I'm like, well, no, that is great. That's good. That's positive for the program, but you still need to do the consent piece. You still need to get Awin consent signals or whatever method done, because, ultimately, it's still sending back, it's still requiring consent for the cookie. The cookie is still being used. It's just being sent back to the network in a different way. So re-emphasize that point, that it is really important that this is dealt with.
Absolutely.
I think sorry, G, I think the other thing I would quickly make as well is it's actually quite easy to do. I think, again, this is a thing that that sometimes kind of we'll hear back and say, oh, it's gonna take a while because our tech team needs to do it, etc. A lot of the time this is done via either the consent platform or GTM, and that isn't massive tech piece. We've had some advertisers who have done this in an hour. So it doesn't feel like it has to be every setup is going to be different, and we completely understand that. But the point to kind of convince the DPO, I think, has been made with what the ICO have clarified on the website. And now it's a case of just kind of getting it pushed through and into that tech queue. But the actual piece of work itself is very minimal.
See. Okay, that's useful. And I think useful context for maybe advertisers facing this at the moment, or who are perhaps thinking about how they might implement that solution. You mentioned when you were talking a little bit earlier, James, about ICO compliant solutions with regards to consent. What does that mean? And what's a good solution? What's a bad solution?
Yeah, so basically the way that it effectively works is when someone comes through from our website, the affiliate network will be able to kind of tell the website and the advertiser website that this customer has come from a cashback site or has come from a cashback or loyalty site. When that happens, effectively what consent signals or other kind of platforms similar to is they say now's the time to, so if it says that it's come from a cashback site, then the cookie goes onto the user's machine and gets set regardless of whether they select yes or no. If they don't, then it will kind of go on further. In relation to the ICO boxes themselves and the different setups there, and I think I've got a couple of slides that just share some results from this, will come up as well. If we skip forward, I think too. is you'll see like an example of like a bad consent here. So this is a consent box. So when we go into kind of ICO compliance, what the ICO have basically said, and do your own research on it, is like they like to have like an accept or reject all button, for example. They need to be in the same colors. They don't necessarily need to be what this is, where you have to say yes or no to every single type of cookie before you kind of click, before you can even access the advertiser's website. So this particular advertiser moved from having a box like this to the box on the next page. This is what like an ICO compliant box looks like. So again, it's got accept all and reject all or decline all in the same button, rather than kind of a managed cookies and accept all and managed cookies that some have. So this will still get a high number of customers that reject that cookie because they don't want to be followed around the internet. So that's why it's important to have the tracking in the right place. But despite that, if we look at the results just from when these brands turn it over and their conversion rates, you'll see in the next slide, they increase their conversion rate just by changing that consent box to having loads of different buttons you have to press yes or no on, to having one button for accept all and reject all. And their conversion rate increased by 54%. So I think it is really important that like it isn't just a case of where the tracking sits. It's also what those boxes look like and how you can make improvements to that. And that can be really powerful.
Excellent. Thank you. It's really useful. And I think that's really interesting to think about, whether you are brand side or perhaps also if you're publishers, to be able to look through some of your largest brands and perhaps talk to them about what that might look like. So we've deep dived there onto consent. Let's bring it back to the tracking topic. And today marks the launch of Awin's CPI. I wonder if, Adam, you'd maybe like to explain a little bit about what CPI is and updates on what's happening today.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before, CPI was really us recognizing that this was a problem that was increasing in size and that we wanted to do something about it. The main thrust of it, certainly in the outset, was to ensure that people upgraded their tracking. But at the same time, to say that there's sometimes things that get in the way of that. It doesn't matter what they are, really. There's various obstacles that come, whether it's dev resource or reluctance internally or different priorities. We've seen all sorts of things, certain brands within a group being deprecated and therefore not being a focus. There's many different reasons why sometimes upgrading tracking isn't possible. And so instead of what we were saying before CPI, which is, okay, well, we just forget about that and we don't do anything about it, we're also talking about introducing a form of probabilistic tracking to fill those gaps. And I think that's a really important step because one, sometimes it's just simply necessary. And as I say, it's not acceptable to just say, okay, we won't track, we won't do anything, and have all this work and effort put in by publishers for no reward. And secondly, and I think this is a very important point, I think the industry really needs to start thinking about and embracing probabilistic forms of tracking and trying to push the industry forward that way, because as we spoke about just a few moments ago, the consent issue is not solved by tracking sophistication. And the consent issue continues to worsen. So what do we do in that scenario? Fortunately, because James managed to lobby the ICO on behalf of loyalty here, and he's got an exemption for those sites. We have a similar exemption issued by CNIL, the French authorities. But what does it mean for the rest of the publisher community and other publisher categories? And here I think we need to look at probabilistic tracking. And so we're launching that at the moment. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes, but we think this paves the way in the future for probabilistic tracking to become more common within the industry and to really plug these gaps long term.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I guess I work closely with a few publishers who really rely on paid media spend and don't have the reward mechanic, so wouldn't qualify for the loyalty exemption. So for them, that sort of revenue be able to grow in line with that, I think, is really, really important. So that's great to hear that that's on Awin's radar. How are you seeing things with regards to the CPI launch now? What have you seen advertisers making changes? What sort of impact is that having?
Yeah, we've been really happy with the progress. So we have about 30,000 advertisers on Awin across the world, and it's helpful to see it on the slide here. So 5,000 of those were identified at the beginning as not compliant, and since announcing it, we've had over 500 successfully upgrade their tracking, and another 1,500 are in progress. So we think in really short order, we're going to address 40% of the affected base. So that's a great outcome. I mean, we've been trying to, it's been a long time since we've been talking to advertisers about upgrading tracking. These technologies have been here for a while, and it's still been very difficult to get it done. So what this has done is really drive that adoption at a much faster rate than we've ever seen before. And we do think now, as the deadline passes and we start to calculate the CPIs and add them to advertiser programs, and that's going to trigger even more conversations, because with all the best will in the world and all the marketing that we can do, we can't cover the entire base. But actually seeing the CPI implemented will spark further conversation and get even more advertisers to upgrade. And I think that's a really positive outcome.
Excellent. And where you're talking about successfully upgrading their tracking there, what does that actually mean? What are they upgrading to, and why is that better?
So they're upgrading from what was largely sort of cookie-based, third-party cookie-based tracking mechanisms in some cases, to tracking mechanisms that are now, I mean, some people think that server-to-server doesn't involve cookies. It still involves cookies. It's just that they're first-party cookies, which are much more successful, much less likely to be blocked. And those are read by the advertiser's website, and then the successful transactions that result from those referrals get sent back to us server to server. So from the advertiser's server to Awin server. And that is much more robust. Again, much less likely to be interfered with or blocked. And on average, we see that we track about 12.6% more transactions by using this methodology than we do by any other. And so what you can see on the screen here is that it's contributing already to over a fifth more sales being tracked. So 600,000 more sales, $60 million in revenue, $3.5 million in commission to publishers. And so really meaningful and really impactful. And this is going to continue.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's really interesting. And are there other types of tracking that is needed that would otherwise qualify for CPI?
Yes, the other type of tracking is on apps. Now, the app tracking situation is a big problem where advertisers have very popular apps, and a large number of sales are likely to transact in there. And so part of the initiative with CPI has also been about getting app tracking implemented. Now, app tracking is complex. Advertisers are naturally very protective over their app setups. They don't want anything to get in there that slows the experience down or makes it clunky in any way. So we have to approach that very sensitively. But we have partnerships with all the major app tracking providers. So it's very easy to implement in the end. And it doesn't impact the performance of the app, but it certainly has a huge impact on the performance of affiliate programs, especially when when apps are popular.
Yeah, I think through the conversations that we've been having within the APMA, I've certainly seen all publishers, but in particular publishers targeting the younger demographic, who really see the impact of that, where it's so much more likely that they might be transacting through an app. Have you seen advertisers making that change to their tracking so far? Sort of how's the uptake on that been?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got some examples that we're going to pull up, but I think there's one advertiser in the pet sector. They put app attribution on in November 24. In the first 3 months after that upgrade, we saw a 35% increase in incremental sales from its app that would previously have just gone completely unrecorded. So that's phenomenal results. We've seen a big global sportswear brand implement app attribution. And they've, and also it's very important for the influencer and the creator marketplace, who tend to use apps more, and they tend to refer business from app to app more. And what we saw there from comparing May to December to the previous year, where they had no app attribution, we saw a 74% increase in sales and a 26% increase in revenue from its influencer and content partners. So, I mean, really meaningful stuff, absolutely essential if you want to run campaigns in these sectors to have this technology active.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to jump in as well because I think it's really important. Like, I think this is all really great numbers and shows like the work that can be done to increase when you have the actual tracking there. But I think it's also important to note like there's still even consent issues of app tracking itself. Apple have ATT, which is a app transparency framework or whatever it is called. That's, well, framework is F, so it's not that, but you get my point. And effectively, that's where when you have an iOS phone and like when you open the app for the first time, it might say, "Hey, do you want to be able to share this data with third parties?" That if someone says no to that, which a lot of customers do, then that can sometimes mean that we can't get the sales back to the affiliate network. So like even with getting the app tracking and seeing some of those good results, it could be even better. And that's why I think like it is important to like say like it's not like even once this is done. And I think like and there'll be so much more stuff that comes out in the future. Like I think for me, like this is a really good way of getting advertised to update the traffic. But I think the problem is like it's never going to be over. Right? Something else will come up. There'll be more that comes about. Who knows what Apple are going to do next with new kind of privacy regulations? Because they always seem to be the first to do it. But yeah, I think even on the consent piece, we could look at consent across from the mobile piece as well and what's been lost there. And again, it's another thing to look at that will hopefully be included in the future. So yeah, really positive steps. But it's worth knowing like it won't just be these. Like there's more coming down the line.
Excellent. So we've had a bit of an overview there of what's going on generally within tracking, some of the stats that have been seen, both from a specific publisher point of view and the network point of view, and a bit of a deep dive into consent and the CPI launch today. What we're going to do now is move to questions from the audience, which is all of you. So you should see a box there where you can write in your questions. Do feel free to submit them. You can also upvote other people's questions if you're particularly keen, and we'll be working through some of these. So I'm going to start off with one for you, Adam. Here's a nice one for you. You recently posted on LinkedIn that some competitor networks are using CPI as a way to sell against Awin. How do you see that narrative evolving over the next year, and how's Awin preparing for that?
So when we first conceived CPI, we kind of war gamed it a little bit and sort of how our competitors going to respond. We assumed that some may do this. We hoped that they wouldn't. So it was a little bit disappointing to see some of those approaches. I suppose reassuringly, we were sent those by the clients. So I don't think that those are going to be particularly successful attempts. I did wonder how anybody could position that as a positive in a sales process. I think it hasn't really landed in the way that those salespeople hoped it would, and I think it probably won't again. So it's not something that we were particularly concerned about because of the nature of that sell. And I think my message to all our competitors is, I think what we've shown here is that doing this has had a really positive impact. It has a really positive impact for the entire ecosystem. So I really think that selling against it in that way is a strange sell. It's probably not advisable. I think that really I appreciate that different competitors may want to approach this challenge in different ways, but the principle that underpins it, the idea that tracking should be more sophisticated, more accurate, really should be something that's supported and upheld by everybody. And I do have to say that in private conversations with competitors, I hear this. And so that's a good thing. I would like to see them also do something rather than just signal their support. But certainly I don't hear anybody that disagrees with the principle of it. And so I consider that a good thing. And hopefully we don't see much more of this, because I think it's just not good for anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that. James, let's go to you for this one. So CPI payments are obviously coming in from this month, from the first payment months this month. There has been some talk about advertisers potentially cutting affiliate commissions to offset against that. What would your take be on that, and what kind of message does that send to publishers?
I think my general thing is quite a short-term view, right? I think I can understand that might be the first thing they jump at, because they might say, we've got an affiliate budget here, and yeah, can we support the extra payments? But like, I think ultimately, even advertisers do that. I would hope that would be a very short-term measure, because at the end of the day, I think what like we all just want to be able to associate the sales correctly in affiliate channel. Like publishers obviously want it because we're getting paid fairly for the sales that we should be tracking and maybe aren't. I think ultimately, like, it's also about the industry itself and the ROAS that you see from it. Like the more sales are tracked, and the more reliable that tracking data is, then ultimately the more that the channel will kind of see, and then that means a better ROAS, and then hopefully more budget being put towards the affiliate channel because it's been attributed correctly. So I think it's not even just those that are kind of going to be hit by the CPI. I think it's those that have done it. And they're saying, well, now I've made this change, I'm going to lower my CPAs. We saw an example of that recently. But yeah, for me, I think like let's hopefully celebrate the success that this brings and the extra sales it attracts. Because I think I'm Adam, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think like the point here isn't to try and necessarily like get people to pay an additional fee, for if they don't have the service server or the app tracking installed. But the point here is to get everyone to install service server and app tracking, right? That would be the idea, is to have 100% of people to do that. And then, the correct sales then be attributed rather than problematic ones. And then the channel's shown in a much better light. So for me, it's really about kind of encouraging that, and hopefully every advertiser will put in place the right tracking so we can actually pass back that tracking to our members or to other publishers themselves.
Yeah, I think what we hope is that when people, and we obviously discuss this plenty with our top clients, they work out what CPAs they're going to pay based on on the price they're selling the goods for, and obviously we've got quite some sophisticated technology that allows them to be very flexible with that, and those commission rates are set mindfully. There's a lot of discussion that goes around setting those. What we're talking about here is fairly attributing sales that probably should belong to the affiliate channel that we're going to other channels. So that shouldn't mean that those sales are worth less commission. So that's the first principle. Secondly, obviously we understand that we tried to time this in such a way that it allowed the vast majority of advertisers to budget for it. We know that affiliate marketing spend comes from marketing budgets. We're not blind to that. And our goal here, our primary goal, is to try and get to as much accuracy as we possibly can. And that may lead to some difficult budget discussions and considerations within the year that it's implemented. What we hope long-term is that when everything is as accurate as it possibly can be, and people look at the true value that affiliates are driving for each advertiser, that those budget conversations can be reopened, and we can talk about really taking budget that was misattributed to other channels back into the affiliate channel, and really get CPAs moving in moving up, not just because of this, just because it's worth more. It makes sense to do it. The ROI is good. And that, I think, but those conversations have to start from a position of accuracy. And that's what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I might just add to that from the point of view of advising the publisher teams that I work with as well, I think there is definitely the part around it is a fair reward for sales. There is definitely a part around accuracy. But I would say that within nearly every publisher business model, there's also a revenue advantage to the advertiser for having better tracking as well. If you're working with top cashback, your member queries will be paid more effectively. Your commissions will go out to the right people with a better customer experience. If you're working with a site that is powered primarily through paid media, whether that's comparison, CSS, etc., they send those signals to their paid media sources in order to grow your program and get more sales. So better tracking doesn't just mean paying for things you would have got otherwise. Better tracking unlocks another layer of revenue that you weren't previously able to access. And I think that's such an important part of the message for publishers to be reinforcing with advertisers.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we kind of say a lot to our advertisers, and it frustrates me a bit when sometimes you get a response to why should we, track all these extra sales almost, like it's going to impact our budget. It's like, these are your customers. Like from our perspective, like we pass that money back to the customer. If they have a bad experience, it's not just us they have a bad experience with, it's you as a brand. If you think about it, if you're a travel brand, especially in like, or a brand like that has really high CPAs or really high order values, and it's like, it can be hundreds of pounds, that you might miss out on. And like, that's the bit that gets to me the most, is like, this is all like customers, if they're going to lose that kind of money, just aren't going to order you again, because there are lots of like competition out there at the end of the day. Like, you're not probably the only person selling your product. So that's again another reason why it's so important to track these things correctly, so that you give those customers, especially ones using loyalty sites, like the best possible experience. They can get the reward that they've earned.
Absolutely. Let's take another question from the audience. Dom Sterling asks, if server-to-server tracking requires consent and cookie placement, why is it any more accurate or reliable than browser-based tracking? And why is Awin pushing this integration with their CPI program?
Well, firstly, first-party cookies are more likely to track than third-party cookies. So that's number one. So it's still, based on cookie tracking, but those that are set by first party, by the domain that you're on when you click the link, are more likely to pass through and track. And secondly, we know that this type of tracking improves performance. We can tell, which sales we've tracked that we otherwise wouldn't have tracked. And what we want to do is, by the way, provide visibility and transparency for everybody on this, so that so that everybody can see for themselves how it works and which sales are tracked using which methods. But it's a bit more of a longer term play for us at the moment. And so we're pushing it because we know that it makes a big difference, like a meaningful difference, as I showed with some of the examples. But we're also not blind to the fact, as we spoke about in this session, that it's not the magic bullet. It doesn't solve every problem. It solves some of the problem, a decent portion of the problem, but not the whole problem. And that's really why the introduction of probabilistic tracking can act as a driver to improve tracking accuracy, but it's also something, and I want to clearly state this, that I think we should get used to as an industry, because it's probably going to be the only way that we can compensate for some of the other issues, mostly consent, that get in the way of tracking journeys.
Yeah. I think just to add to Adam's point there as well, and not to be too technical, but I think the other thing is, like, when you use the ad blockers, I think that's one of the things that we always struggle to understand, what impact ad blockers have on sales being tracked via the affiliate channel. Now, the top 2 ad blockers on Chrome Store alone, between them, have 100 million downloads and installs, or active users. That's people that have it live at the moment in their Chrome. So, and that's just 2 of them. There's a lot more than that as well. And when you go down to some of the smaller ones, they can be a lot more aggressive. Like when you block or something like that, that sometimes stops you from even clicking an affiliate link, let alone when you get to a checkout page and you've got some JavaScript on there, you've got something else on there that might be sending the data back to the affiliate network. So even though both forms of tracking are using cookies, and sometimes they're both using first-party cookies as well, it's often when you get to the transaction page and that data getting from the advertiser back to the network, that is what can get blocked by some of these ad blockers, and other things and other network connections. Whereas if the server has the cookie details and is sending it to another server via a webhook or whatever else it's using, then that is where you can see kind of the more positive results come through. So yeah.
Another question from the audience. Warwick Lambert asks, is there more that Awin could do to communicate what's going to happen with CPI to publishers? Based on the slide that Adam showed, there are around 3,000 advertisers who'll be making CPI payments this month, but publishers haven't yet been told which retailers, how much they'll be impacted, etc., or when that will be received. And as much as the adjunct bonuses are a great benefit, publishers like Genie Shopping, who are spending millions each year promoting Awin retailers, want to be able to invest that in growing those campaigns. So are they going to be able to get that information?
Yeah. So we understand the frustration there. So it launches today, but the first calculation, I think, happens on the 24th of April. At that point, we're going to be in a position to share some details with publishers. It's going to be more manual at first, but our vision is to really include this into the UI. We want full visibility on this for publishers, so you can make the right decisions, the fair decisions, and it's going to come. I think before it goes into the UI, we are building an API, so publishers will be able to get the information from that. I don't have a delivery date for that just yet, but the product team promised me it should be by the end of Q2.
Okay, fantastic. And if people want to find out more information about Awin CPI, is there more resources available and can you point them to?
Yes. we just launched the CPI hub today, which is, there's the URL. So if you go to awin.com/CPI, we tried to include absolutely everything on there. And please let us know if there's something missing or you'd like more information on. We're happy to update this to make it as useful a resource as possible.
Excellent. That's really good. And yeah, it sounds like the API and coming later, the interface updates would be really, really useful for publishers wanting to use that revenue to grow.
Absolutely.
So we're just about coming to time. What I'm going to ask James and Adam in a moment, just when we close off, is for you to give everyone your top recommendations for what you think they should be thinking about with regards to tracking and consent in Q2 this year. What are the top things that you think should be front of mind or actions that they should take? Are either of you happy to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. I think don't get confused by the technology. Really, there are very simple ways to get your tracking in shape. Whether you, if you're worried about resourcing, there are even partners in place. There's a company called Stape that we actually, if you look on our blog, you'll see a Q&A with the founder there. That's a company that you can pay to help you implement this. So it means that you don't need to worry about deprioritizing your own dev resources. So don't let sort of any technical concerns get in the way of implementing the best quality tracking. On consent, really research and come talk to us and come talk to publishers like James on good implementations of CMPs versus ones that cause major problems. And I think there's a lot that can be done there to improve the situation, which is really almost like UX changes. So please research that as effective as you can, because that's another big impact apart from the tracking. Those would be my top tips.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, like a big piece of it for me is just be open and transparent with us. Like at the end of the day, like I think with the number of emails that we've sent out to advertisers, there's probably just under 50% of them where the advertiser just hasn't replied to us. So they haven't done the work, they haven't replied to us, they've not given us an indication. Just like let's have that conversation. Like what we're finding is like we've obviously got the ICO piece that's been done that kind of takes away kind of a lot of the kind of DPO requests, but like if you're struggling with that, because I know there's a question earlier on that we didn't get a chance to answer, like we have a legal paper that like our law firm produced that goes over all of the stuff, all of the ICO guidelines, why there's an exemption, stuff that we can send there. We've put together an FAQ link that I'm more than happy to send across that goes over why is it so important. Some of the graphs that we just shared earlier on over kind of what's happening and why consent is such a big piece of this. So like just have that conversation with us. Like this is really important. It impacts our share customers. But I don't think we're stopping there as well. Like tracking is really important, but so is everything else in your program. Validation speeds, payment speeds, cancellation rates. Like we want our members to have the best possible experience. That's like we're going to be really championing into 2025 and the rest of 2025 is like, let's get a tracking sorted. But let's also look at the other things that can be improved that can give customers the best experience and get their cash back as quick as they can.
Absolutely. If I might add my own tip onto what Adam and James have said there as well, another really useful place to find resources on this can be with the APMA. So, for example, if you are looking for backup to your conversations that you're having with retailers, being able to point to an independent trade body can also really help. And that's all very supportive of the themes that Adam and James have talked about today. So that can be another place to go to get a bit of extra resources and support. But I think that's all that we have time for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for quite an intensive chat about tracking and consent on a Monday afternoon. And thank you so much to Adam and James for joining in and answering everyone's questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.